It's actually recording. Yep. Okay, so for your homework, you were to investigate authentication, specifically kind of bank-like authentication, right? Something along those lines. All right, what did we find out? So our typical authentication just deals with username, password. Maybe we encrypt that a little bit, right? How do banks differ? Or places like banks? What's the next step? Go ahead.
I have like a series of multiple security questions that they ask you.
Okay. Questions like
personal information.
Okay, where are they getting that information?
Like when I signed up at the bank, they had me fill it out right away, and that's what they use to verify.
Okay. So one possibility is when you can look at something even less secure. When you sign up for like an Apple account or something like that, they want you to have like 2 or 3 different like special questions that they can ask you that only you know the answer to is the idea. So they can ask those as follow-up if you're trying to recover your password or something. But have you ever been to one of those sites where it's asking you like what street, which of these is a street you lived on at some point in your life, that kind of stuff?
Yeah, my bank, it's a little bit interesting. When you try and log in for a different computer and it starts to ask you security questions, it says compiling questions from public databases.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, but then like the questions are pretty much always the same.
Okay, so they might be acting like they're getting it from a bunch of databases.
Yeah, but they're not.
Okay. But we've probably all, at least at some point, seen that example of what I'm talking about, where it's seemingly pulling information from some sort of record somewhere. You didn't, like the example I'm coming up with is, which of these is the street that you once lived on? Something like that. It gives you 4 streets, and one of them happens to be a street you lived on.
Which one of these people do you know?
Oh, you've seen that one? I don't know if I've seen that one. Okay, so possibly some extra questions they might ask you to validate who you are. Now, do banks typically do that always when you log in? Where we see it most often is when we're trying to like recover a password. When they're trying to prove that we are who we are.
Or when you're logging in from a different location.
Okay, so that's one example of kind of a security measure that some more secure locations, more secure sites do. So if you have a bank, maybe the first time you log in from a specific location, you have to go through a couple of extra steps. And then you can choose whether or not to trust that location. Make sense? Okay. So, and from that point forward, you're basically saying you're taking some of the liability on yourself because you're saying that this location is secure or something like that. Okay, go ahead.
I have a funny case. Like when I came to US, I tried to log in my Outlook account, and as I always log in Brazil, it was just blocked and I couldn't log in here. So I have to ask someone in Brazil to log in there, and there's an option that you have to say that you are outside of your country, something like that.
Oh, so it blocked you, and there was no way you can even get into it in the States. Yeah, you literally had to phone home. That's interesting. Wonder why they would do that. Just suspicious activity? Yeah, we can see you making you change your password. But typically they would have sent you a link to your email, but since that was your email, yeah, it's interesting. Okay, so possibly personal information. What else? Go ahead.
I remember the Born Supremacy movie when they were going to the bank and they did a handprint.
Okay.
I mean, there's a couple technologies out there right now. Some laptops have a finger slider thing. I mean, the iPhone has a fingerprint reader. So
okay.
Read a fingerprint.
Okay, so these types of augmented type authentications are becoming more commonplace now. You see in the movies the retina scans and the face recognition stuff and the voice recognition stuff. I think at some point I've seen something in the movies about it, like you like go up to something, you breathe on it, and it gets your DNA from your breath or something like that. I don't know how close we are to that one. But certainly a second tier of authentication. Username, password, thumbprint, something like that. But in a lot of the movies, what happens if something Like the one that's coming to mind is Demolition Man. Is that how many of you have seen Demolition Man? Is that before your time? Sylvester Stallone when he was younger. Oh, it's a great flick. Sylvester Stallone was like an awesome cop, and they called him Demolition Man because he always solved the case, but he always just left everything blown up. And the prisons then were they put you in like cryogenic stasis, and so the guy he caught was the Simon Phoenix guy, the ultimate crook, who got put on ice, cryogenic freeze. Well, then Demolition Man got put on ice too, for allegedly killing a bunch of people as when he was solving one of these cases or something like that. Well, later on, years and years and years and years later, when society had no crime, so police didn't know what they were doing anymore, they had to somehow the criminal guy got defrosted and was out killing people, so they had to defrost an old school police officer to catch the old school criminal, that type of thing. The reason that came up is in that movie they had one of the authentication things was a retina scan, but the bad criminal guy he just ripped people's eyes out and used that to scan it. And he carried it around in a little pencil. Doors open. So same thing, thumbprints. So you're just wearing somebody else's face.
I don't know if you've tried it, but on the Xbox you can literally walk into the room with the Kinect and it can read that it's your face and it'll sign you in automatically.
Yeah.
So,
And how accurate have you found that to be?
very accurate.
Really?
I mean, you just have to have a clear space in front of you, but
Yep.
whenever it's on and I just sit there, it signs me in.
Okay. Yep. I've seen that. I know you play your Xbox more than I did. I just was wondering if there was a level of accuracy that there was some wiggle room there. So you're saying it really worked pretty much always.
As long as the sensor isn't blocked.
Got it. Okay, so kind of a third tier type thing. We can use thumbprints, that kind of stuff. All right. Those have their own weaknesses, like we just pointed out, cutting thumbs off.
You kind of leave your fingerprints all over the place anyway.
Yeah, kind of leaving your fingerprints. We've seen. I've seen that in the movies too. Actually, when did I? National Treasure.
Oh, yeah,
The second one, they had the wine glass, and they used it to get the person's thumbprint off of it, and they put the thumbprint on something like a contact lens looking thing, and then put it on this glove or this little thumb thing, and then use that to fake the fingerprint. So it seems like you can get around some of those things.
You don't leave your irises wherever you go.
Make sure you have your eyes with you. Okay, so is there a maybe less creepy side of a second tier authentication? We've actually experienced it in here. Go ahead.
I was going to say I found one bank in Utah. They went with the username and password, but when you first create it, they have you enter it a bunch of times, and it records how you type it in. So not only do you have to get it in correctly, but like patterns that you type in.
Oh, I see. Initially, it seems like that might be hard to kind of get that pattern, but I kind of know what you mean. Like we all have our go-to passwords, and we've gotten really good at typing those go-to passwords, and we kind of almost have a cadence to it. So I can see maybe something like that's almost like a signature. When you're signing the back of a credit card, and they're supposed to compare your signature you just signed on something to the back of the credit card. Does it ever match?
Somebody was drawing pictures at Walmart and they didn't even check.
Yeah, well, I don't think they ever check anymore. The box for you sign your credit card is too small, so nobody can sign their full signature anyways. Plus, it's an unwritable surface, so nobody can sign their credit cards anyways. Yeah, and my signature is terrible. I say terrible. It's just an M with an L and just a bunch of wigglies. Okay. What else? What have we experienced in here?
Texting the one-time password.
Okay, or something. So the example that I bring up, I have an app on here called Authy that several different sites might use. So I think it's probably going to default to my CEX site. So there's a code. This code is good for 20 seconds with a countdown. And after 20 seconds, that code isn't good anymore. I have to wait for the next 20 seconds. So this would be kind of equivalent to the thumbprint type thing, that you have to have this device with you. Not only do you have to have the knowledge of the username and password, you also have to have this device with you to log in. And it's only good for so many number of seconds or something like that. So kind of a second tier of user authentication. I've seen that in lots of video games as well, or at least a couple of video games. Have you seen it with any games you've played? I know World of Warcraft uses it. They have a big, and I would assume other games where there's a community of getting characters stolen and stuff like that. I don't think it's a specific to World of Warcraft, just that it just happens to be a kind of where a problem is, where people log into your account and somehow get your characters. Now you can make it a little bit more secure. Is that secure enough for a bank? What's secure enough for us for a bank? There's that delicate balance between it being secure enough and also being convenient. Because don't you hate it when you go to a place where you have to log in and it takes you 10 minutes to log in because of all the hoops you have to jump through? It's like a headache, right? But would you rather have that or have your money stolen? Well, it depends. As long as your money hasn't been stolen, you'd probably rather have the convenience. As soon as your money has been stolen, you're like, hey, well, how did you let somebody get into my account? Don't you have security? It's what's in it for me, right? Okay, so now kind of dragging this towards what we're trying to do with it. We're trying to look for a reasonable level of authentication for a voter. So I'm a voter. I'm going to go in. I'm going to log into some system. And when I log into this system, that gives me the right to vote. Go ahead.
Are we planning on like voting at home, or are we thinking of going to a voting center and voting?
Let's talk about that. Do you have a?
Well, I think you can be more secure if you make them go to a voting center, because I think like scanning your fingerprint or something is a little more secure than a password, because it's something on you and not something that can be written down and stolen or something like that.
See, in my mind, I almost argue the other way. I think it can be more secure if you let them do it wherever they want.
Go to a voting center. I think there's more potential for fraud in the sense that somebody would go as someone else.
Okay.
Whereas if you're at home, and I know this is a very common security feature, is recognized devices. Like if I log on to my account on a computer that I don't normally use, or that I haven't voted with in the past, so.
Okay. I think where I was kind of going with it is, I think if you have a voting center, now you've essentially given, whoever the bad guys are who want to corrupt the vote, you've given them a single location that they can target for corrupting the vote. Mess with the machines, mess with the network there that's sending the votes out, whatever it is, you've given them one target that's going to be able to affect many, many, many votes, all the people that vote at that one place. Whereas if each person's voting at their own computer, now you have many different points of weakness. And even though it's going to be harder to protect those individual points of weakness, each breach is less damaging, I guess is the idea. But playing devil's advocate, what if somebody comes up with some sort of virus that manipulates the vote, sits on your computer, doesn't do anything, so kind of flies under the radar, and waits till you hit this website to vote, and then kind of hijacks the connection and votes the way it wants to vote? If I'm a virus writer, that would be kind of along the lines of what I might do. Okay, so maybe there's pros and cons to both, going to a central place or just doing it at home. Probably the central place has the lower chance of the virus issue because they can constantly be checking for that type of stuff. Yes, it's more of a single target that everybody, that whoever wants to corrupt the vote can go after, but it's probably also easier to really protect that one place. We can just put a lot of security or whatever, whatever that means. Okay. So let's kind of going down that path. Let's say we are going to a single location. We're going to a voting location. We walk in. How do we want to authenticate?
The
Retina scan, fingerprint, urine test. Say this again. But now you're embarrassed? What? Did you say something funny? But it can't be on the recording.
Well, it won't be on. You can't hear anything that anyone says.
I'm still intrigued with what he said. Okay, so you want to maybe have multiple levels. So some sort of physical authentication, retina scan, fingerprint, something trustworthy. Do we need more than one of those? So maybe one level of physically this is who I am. Okay, probably at the very least a username, password.
Whatever the either the fingerprint or the retina scan could act as a username along with being a mode of authentication because both those things are pretty much unique to every single person.
Mm-hmm. That's kind of where I was hoping we go with this. There's been legislation in the last couple of years that I keep flipping back and forth related to voting where some states don't, I think I mentioned it here one other time, some states don't require that you have an ID. Like shockingly. And a lot of the times the arguments are that for old people it's inconvenient for them to have their ID because they lose stuff, things like that, I guess. Well, if we did fingerprint or retina, I don't think it's going to be inconvenient for them to bring their thumbs or for them to bring their eyes along with them this time. So they'll have the password kind of with them, who they are, the unique identifier. And when they register to vote, we will pick up those pieces of information. Okay, so your thoughts is maybe we go away from the idea of a password. Maybe the most unreliable thing we might have of certainly an elderly voter, but maybe all voters, is we can't trust that they'll remember the password.
Well,
But we can trust that they'll bring their thumbs and their eyes.
I was going to have them have a password as well.
Okay. Do we need one? Why is typing in a password more secure, or how does it add security to a thumbprint plus a retina scan? Just playing sci-fi here.
Well, I mean, fingerprints especially. I mean, you leave fingerprints everywhere, so that it's not so much of something that only you know about.
Okay, so you view fingerprints as being weak.
Yeah.
Potentially weak.
Yeah, I don't personally. I don't see retina scan as being as weak because I don't see you leaving your eye prints everywhere.
Sure.
I guess passwords could have the same issue because you could write them down and you could write them down and leave them wherever. But.
Mm-hmm. Or I like I've seen in some movies and stuff, when somebody's typing their password in often on a keyboard, you can spray something on the keyboard and you gather where they were typing.
Well, I mean, if you use your
If you use your keyboard for a lot of different things, you're going to see, it all over the place. Yeah. But let's say there's like a keypad to get into a door or something like that.
Then
yeah, you'll see the things where the people are actually pushing. But anything that's based on a human being's memory, we kind of immediately think is being somewhat archaic. But we still are doing it, right? We all have usernames and passwords to a bunch of stuff. And for a lot of things, we think that's just fine. Would you prefer to use a thumbprint to log into all your sites and stuff like that? Retina scan? Well, whatever. Whatever the equivalent is. I mean, it's kind of interesting because we're going in that direction. The iPhones have it, but everybody else is coming out with thumbprints now on their devices. And Apple Pay, part of how you pay is you hold it up, and as soon as it says pay, you put your thumbprint on it and say, I am who I am. Done. That's the payment. So you only authenticated with the fact that you physically had a device that had the credit card information on it and your thumb. Good.
I know from donating plasma, you have to scan in with your fingerprint, and then you give your last four of your social, and that's how they know who you are.
Okay. So you're registered in some way, biometrically from your thumbprint, and then also legally through your social security number. Okay? Okay. Is that good enough? So we got thumbprints laying around. Social security number is a dime a dozen, right? Now, did you have to, when you first went to do that, did you have to like register with them with your thumbprint and stuff? So how do they know who you were to begin with?
Or you just like, well, you give them all your information, like your personal information.
Government issued ID.
Yeah, your driver's license and your address.
I've seen a lot of places they'll accept like, you know, the last your last power bill. You can steal that out of a mailbox, right? We just keep coming up with all these different ways we can break authentication. So maybe the global question here is, can we have perfect authentication? Is that possible?
No.
Well, is it possible ever?
I mean, you could possibly read brainwaves that are specific to the individual.
Sure. So, but then we're getting to the point where, you know, we don't have the understanding of that, so we can at least speculate that if some technology can read your brainwaves, there might be another technology that can fake your brainwaves. So you get what I'm saying? You know, obviously we're sci-fi, Star Trek stuff now, but it seems unlikely that we can ever have an authentication system that's 100% foolproof. It's just not going to happen. So to strive for that is a waste of time. So what we need to do is we need to center in on what is good enough. And we hold different applications to different standards. So logging into Angel here on campus, if we had to do a retina scan for that, we'd probably be upset. Right? You know, it's too much work, too much of a headache to log into Angel when really all you're using it for is submitting homework assignments and stuff like that. You know, somebody steals your homework or submits homework in your place. They get a good grade and you thank them. So, right, then you tell a teacher somebody stole my Angel and they don't believe you because who would steal an Angel account? So really, you could just make the argument, why doesn't Angel just have a drop down? Pick who you are. But for our banks, we want additional security. When we take voting, the problem of voting, certainly we could say that's more like banks. Should voting be more secure than your money? Is it the same? Is it less secure than your money? So we're kind of putting banks pretty high up there that we want that protected. We're willing to be inconvenienced a little bit here because we log into Angel all the time. We log into our email all the time. We go into our bank sometimes. And we want that to be secure. Is voting like that something we only do sometimes and it's okay for it to be less convenient? Certainly. Does it need to be more secure than a bank? Again, going off this idea that we can just keep throwing security measures at something and all we're doing is adding additional layers. You know, it's impossible to completely secure something. You think in, like the United States, what is it? Fort Knox is supposed to be very secure, right? Does that mean it's impossible to get into Fort Knox? Seems very, very unlikely, but not impossible. I'm sure there's one of these war games where you can raid Fort Knox or something, right? It's got to exist. You play the war games, don't you? Like Battlefield and stuff like that? But you get what I'm saying. You know what I'm saying? I mean, it's not impossible. Just hard. So given that, we can treat voting like a bank. Something like that. It shouldn't be, we're going to lean more on security than we are on convenience because we're not going to vote all the time. But at the same time, we don't need it to be ridiculous. So what do you think is appropriate from a technology today perspective for voting? And I'm going to take it a step further and kind of put the requirement, this kind of comes from Abe's question, where are we going to vote? I'm going to say that people should be able to vote from their home computers. So we can't necessarily rely on people having retina scanners. I mean, that's a limitation, right? We have them go to a place, they would have to have retina scanners. But then we have the same issue with normal voting today, where you have 1,000 different polls across the country, probably more than that, but let's just say it's 1,000, and there's all sorts of different technologies being used. And right. Right, and and some people, well, I mean, just even the voting technology. You have, when you go back to that election with Al Gore and George W. Bush, there were people who were manually punching holes through a card, and then you had other systems that were very much computerized, and everything in between. Same thing happens today. We don't have consistency across the board, so we need to play to the lowest common denominator. So for us, we're going to say they must have a computer with an internet connection. Maybe it's web-based. The voting thing is web-based. We can assume that everybody who's going to vote has to have an internet connection. They either have it at home or they go to the library or something like that. And you probably have some places that host voting, voting things. Come and get a cup of coffee and vote here if you're somebody who doesn't have internet at home or something like that. So that's going to be a requirement. We need to be able to authenticate them on the go. So that's going to take all these biometric stuff out of the equation, at least for today. So what's good enough security? Do we ask them that personal information stuff? Right now, people register to vote, right? What should happen when you register to vote? I think we can control this between the registration side of things and the actual authentication side of things. If you go and you sign up for Outlook, you register for an account. And they initially ask you first name, last name, address, whatever. A bunch of pieces of information about you, as well as username, password, enter the password a second time so we know who you are. Probably they then also send you an email that you have to click on to say, yes, I had access to that email. So really part of the authentication is the registration process itself. The person who says they are who they are is who they are. Just let's assume it's good. They are that person. So when somebody goes to register to vote, we need to be able to uniquely identify that they are a valid voter. Because we can't have 6-year-olds voting. At least not by our laws today, right? You have to be 18 to vote. So now you might have a family of 4, and the dad can vote 3 times, 4 times, because he can register with both of his kids or something like that. So how do we validate that somebody is allowed to vote? It's got to be a central repository, right? This is in the bigger important votes like presidential stuff, not for our stupid little class president votes. So we look up at the top level, voting for president or something like that. We're going to have a central repository of all the people who are allowed to vote. Who's in control of that? So there's a database somewhere that has a bunch of social security numbers in it. And when you go to register and you put in a social security number, we're going to say that, oh yeah, that's me. So I'll put my social security number in, and I hit, I want to register for this account, and it goes and looks it up and say, okay, well, this person is a valid voter. How does it go to the next step? Does it link my first name and last name to it? Probably. Maybe date of birth. How many pieces of information do I have to give it before it actually believes that I am who I say I am?
Well, I mean, when you're originally registering, you could ask for quite a bit of information because it's a one-time thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Registering to vote. So, I guess I would say probably name, date of birth, social security number. Maybe something else. I don't know.
Picture ID. Go ahead.
You can ask for take a picture or scan the SSL itself and make an upload, and someone has to validate in the server to say, okay, this account is activated or something like that.
Okay. So I have a second tier of authentication on the registration process. You see where we're getting at here. There's multiple problems that we run into. So even if we just think about first name, last name, date of birth, social security number, even though the social security number is supposed to be a private piece of information, how many of you have written that on a piece of paper before? Most of us, right?
Well, they give it to you on a card.
Yeah. I mean, but when you fill out, if you're filling out a thing for a new bank account or something like that, you're writing that on a piece of paper. You're sending it in an electronic form over the internet. We put that thing out there all over the place. So how private is it really?
Aside from the last four, not private at all.
Yeah, not private, right? What about your first name? How private's that? Last name? Date of birth. Jump on Facebook and get people's date of birth, right? Heck, you could probably get their social security number on some people's Facebook accounts, where they think they're having a private conversation with somebody and they're just posting it on their walls. Have you ever seen one of those? Somebody's posting like passwords and stuff on their wall. Usually it's like a kid helping a grandparent or something like that. And he's like, Grandpa, I need to know where your password is. And, probably in a private message. And Grandpa then replies by putting it on his wall what his username and password is. Okay, and then we had an IT person here other times say that, maybe they've seen some people who just put a Post-it note with their username and password up on their computer monitor, something like that. Okay, so is there...
Offices do that a lot.
Mm-hmm. So what's enough information to ask them? Even the registration process has a weakness. How do you register to vote now? How many of you have registered to vote before? Okay. What's the process like?
You gotta bring them information to government issued.
So you're physically going into a place, okay? And you go in with a government issued ID?
Yeah, and like something that tells you where you are living.
Yeah, I think for me it was like driver's license and then birth certificate.
Okay. So driver's license, you had to have two forms of ID, and there was acceptable forms of ID, right? So driver's license, birth certificate, maybe a military ID. There was probably a list of 5 or 6 of them that were considered to be acceptable.
Passport could. I think passport can function on its own or something like that.
Okay. Because the idea is you've already gone through the process?
Yeah.
Okay. And then you had to give them proof of address. That's probably especially important for state elections. I'm not living in Illinois but voting in Wisconsin. I don't know what the laws are, but it's probably frowned upon. Something like that. Okay. But the point is you had to go in and talk to a person. Physical place to register to vote. Okay? And you brought in all this information that says who you are. Ultimately, who did you have to convince that you were who you were? That person. Weakness is people. How many of you have heard of something called social networking as a hacking approach? Usually the easiest way to and you do this all the time. Right?
Social engineering.
Social engineering. Yeah, social engineering. What did I say?
Social networking.
Oh, social engineering. So when you manipulate people, you ask them questions. Good example. There's a movie out there called Hackers. Been out for a while. I think it's on Netflix. You should watch it if you haven't seen it. If you're a computer science major. It was one of Angelina Jolie's first movies. She's in it. As well as the guy who plays Sherlock Holmes in the show, was it Watson? Now? The show that's on now, that guy when he was a lot younger was in this movie. He was a hacker. Huh?
Which Sherlock Holmes?
I think the show's called Watson.
Oh.
Oh, no, Elementary.
Oh, okay.
Elementary. It's him and the Asian woman. That's his sidekick. You know what I'm talking about?
I know what you're talking about, but that one is far less popular,
Oh.
I would say.
Or whatever. That dude was in this movie. Sherlock Holmes from that one is in this movie. But in any case, the movie has a lot of social engineering stuff in it, and one of the early parts of it had this guy who was trying to hack into a television station or something like that so he can change what was being broadcast on TV right now. So this is back in the dial-up modem days. So he calls up the night guard, the night security guy, And he's like, oh yeah, this is Bob from accounting, and I have a big report due tomorrow for Mr. Kawasaki. Just coming up with names, and it would be a big favor if you could just read me the number from the modem. Bob, the security guard, didn't know what he was doing, right? So it's like, oh yeah, no problem. Here's the number from the modem. So a lot of times it's, just, do you think that here on campus, if you wanted to read I'm not suggesting anybody do this, okay? But just consider how scary this is to a certain extent. Let's say you wanted to get into a faculty member's computer, change grades or whatever it is. Could you go to their office, say you were from IT, and say you need to check something on their computer? Do you think that certainly some of them would probably just let you do it? You just believe you're from IT, right? No harm, no foul. Doesn't matter how many passwords you have, doesn't matter retina scanning and thumbprints. If the dude who has access to it is going to thumbprint you in and then let you use their computer, it doesn't matter, okay? So the weakness of all this stuff is going to be people, and we can't get around that. Can we? If we think about registering for voting, could you do that without a human being on the other end? Because human beings by nature are manipulable. Yeah. Could you have pulled that off without talking to a human?
Yeah. What do humans believe when you're talking to them? Like, what are they trying to believe?
Well, you're providing all these pieces of information. So you're showing them your ID, you're showing them your passport, you're showing them your birth certificate. They're going to look at all that stuff and ultimately decide if, heck, we did this the other day. I was on a phone call with Sony trying to get a return label thing to send my PlayStation 4 in for service. And my PlayStation 4 was won from one of those Taco Bell giveaways when the PlayStation first came out. But I didn't have that proof of purchase. They needed a proof of purchase. So I went online and did a Google search, found an example of a proof of purchase, sent this guy that picture, and all of a sudden he said, oh, that's a good proof of purchase. Say, okay. So I really did have a legitimate proof of purchase I just didn't have access to, but it wasn't very difficult to convince that guy that I had a proof of purchase. Totally under warranty. I mean, heck, if I was out of warranty, I just need to find a more recent proof of purchase. Now I'm back in. So that's social engineering. But your question was, what are we trying to convince the person of? That person is our barrier between being able to register for to vote. So we're going to have to convince them that we are who we say we are, that we live in the place that's allowing us to vote, that we're of the right age. So who we are, how old we are, where we live, and ultimately, is this person a valid voter? I'm supposed to have a picture ID on it, right?
So why can't we just automate all of that?
Okay, well,
Have a database of information that this database will constantly be checking the information that we're entering, and if it's able to connect with the other side in the database, it's going to be authenticated.
out of that whole thing, what's the hardest part to automate? Why are they asking for a picture ID?
Probably just
Match your face. That's something human beings are very good at doing. So, even those of you who think that you don't have a great memory or something like that, you recognize people that if you had a picture of somebody and you were looking at somebody that was supposed to be that person, we don't really think about how we're doing it, but we're like, oh yeah, I can see this is you. And then, oh, you've put on a lot of weight, whatever it is, right? They do move in herds. Yeah, he called me fat the other day. He brought up this YouTube video that had a Jurassic Park quote in it that was a bunch of fat people being pushed around. It says they do move in herds. He gave that to me as if like saying, hey, you're fat. You saw Jurassic Park, right?
Yeah.
All right, so we have to convince those people of that. And you want to automate this. Well, really, the facial recognition part is the part that's most difficult to automate. And that's the part we're really working on right now, is being able to match faces. We have tons and tons and tons of technology that goes and tries to get all these different data points, how far apart your eyes are, and eyebrow symmetry, and all this stuff, all these different data points. And as good as they are today, I think that, I'm trying to think what the numbers are. At the very least, it's extremely rare that we, even today, have technology that can exceed what just an average human being can do in terms of recognizing a face. So that's why we want to see that picture ID, and automating that might be a problem. Well, how many of you have fake IDs? Don't raise your hand. Okay.
It's not a video.
That's true. You can raise your hand. So,
There's a camera.
at the very least, we are all aware that fake IDs exist, right? And what's the purpose of a fake ID? Convince a person that you are 21, right? That's typically the purpose of a fake ID. So it's going to have your picture on it, and at the very least, a different birth date. May or may not use your same name. It'd be more convenient to use your same name. But bottom line is, the purpose of it is to convince a human being that you are allowed to drink. So could we create falsified documents to convince a computer program that's trying to do facial recognition that we are who we say we are, and take the human being out of the equation? Would it be easier to trick a person with facial recognition stuff, or easier to trick a computer? And why?
Computer, 'cause they don't accept Benjamins.
It's easier or harder to trick a computer?
Harder.
You think it's harder to trick a computer? Huh?
You can make it harder.
Okay. In what way?
Add more hoops to jump through. And that somebody who's trying to falsify information, you kind of think ahead of what somebody could do.
Okay, you could make the entire process, not just the facial recognition, but the entire process harder if we're going to automate it. So rather than have 3 forms of identification, they have to come up with 30 forms of authentication. So we're going to say voting's really important. You have to prove who you are. It's going to be really rare for somebody to come through and be able to trick us. And this really gets back to problem solving. That's where I was going with the facial recognition thing. Human beings are better at recognizing faces than our modern technology is. That's just a fact right now. We don't know what it'll be like in 20 years, but right now. How many of you know how you recognize faces? We just do, right? So one of the things that we do in computer science is we try to slow our minds down to figure out how we solve problems. How do you recognize a face? When you first look at somebody, when I first glance at somebody, and I recognize, oh, this is Amish. How did I determine that? What were the steps that went through my mind to allow me to recognize, to tell him apart from State Farm? We can't even think about it, right? It's like such a complex problem that you don't know what you do. It's like, well, am I looking at his forehead first, then the right eye? It's like such a complex process that we don't actually know what we do. Can any of you even list the first step? What's that?
Look at something.
Okay. When you look at someone, what are you looking at? You still got to have a target. Okay, you look at their face. All right, so you're probably still zeroing in a specific quadrant of their face at least.
Yeah, I've gotten 2 steps.
It's like, look, first I open my eyes. Once my eyes are open, I usually rotate my neck. Okay. Point is, it's a very complex problem, and we can't break that down into simpler steps. This is really still from a computer science perspective, why artificial intelligence is such a challenge. We are so smart, we're so good at what we do, we can't recreate it. Even the best artificial intelligences that we have out there, the best things that we've come up with to mimic the human brain, have such a minuscule understanding of how the brain works. And that's from years and years and years of research on how the brain works. So at some point, we need to consider that there's certain problems that technology is not going to be able to solve completely. Humans are going to be part of this. When humans are part of something, there's going to innately be a weakness. So we absolutely 100% can't completely validate every single voter that's allowed to vote. So what's our real goal? Our real goal is to do better than what we're doing now. Keep improving on what was there before, then find new problems in the new way. That makes sense? Right. So for us in here, we're going to use a two-step authentication. So username, password, and then probably some sort of fake key we come up with. We're only going to implement it out to a certain point for authentication. We're going to do simple registration for us. We'll just assume it's good. And then we're going to have the ability to cast the votes and the ability to count the votes. All right. So we'll come back on Friday. We'll write our algorithm for counting votes. So that part is done. And then we'll have a kind of a fake JSON election ballot that will have our multiple candidates on it, that has the addresses of each of those candidates, so we can count the votes associated with multiple candidates. I'll see everybody then.